Good day, my lovely little freshmen, almost sophomores. So close to being there. How about it? So, work for the week. What I'm showing you here right now is the first part of the assignment for this upcoming week. So, basically, what's going on is all you're going to do is you're going to use my PowerPoint, which I will show you in a moment, and you're just filling in this chart. Okay, so this is part of the assignment. Really easy. If you don't want to use my video, you don't have to. You could literally just look at the PDF version of the PowerPoint and be able to do this. I think it's pretty straightforward because although we are talking about actually like 4 civilizations, but there's only 3 you have to record, they have a lot of similarities with one another with just like, some slight little differences. So we'll start talking about that. But basically all you're doing is using my PowerPoint. You'll bullet point out maybe 2 or 3 pieces of information for each box, using the acronym we've used earlier this year, GRAPES, right? So the geography, and I wrote little reminders, religion, right? The achievements, P is always politics, so anything government related, the economics, right? So we're talking about agriculture, that's a economic term, and anything society-based related, people's responsibilities. So that's it, just filling the chart, right? That's easy peasy. So you upload that in Plus Portals under homework 5. Now a little bit more detailed part of the work for the week, and actually I'm going to give you the weekend. So some people, hey, if you want to get it earlier, you're more than welcome to, but if you want to use next weekend, my due date on this is Sunday night, so just to give you guys a heads up on that. It's a virtual museum project. So usually what I do, and I've done every single year I've taught an AP or honors freshman class, is I've had you guys go to a museum in person. Obviously we can't do that, so we're going to do it virtually. Basically we're going to do is this. There's a lot of words here, so I'm going to break it down very simple. Okay, what you're going to do, you're going to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. If you've never been, I really hope you get there one day. It's really a fabulous museum. Even if you just go and you only like maybe visit like 2 rooms at the museum, 2 wings or sections. It's a big place, overwhelming place, but great museum nearby Central Park on the Upper East Side. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna go to the Met Museum online. Okay, I'll give you guys the link in your work. Then you go to search. Okay, your task for this project is you need to look up 4 artifacts in total. So each artifact is going to be based off of one civilization we're going to talk about in the PowerPoint. So that's going to be the Olmecs, which was not on the previous screen, and then the Aztec, Maya, Inca, and those are your 4. So 1 artifact per civilization, right? So all I want you to do is you go to the search, you type in the word Aztec. Okay, you give it a moment, and if you notice, there are 460 results of artifacts from the Aztec civilization. So honestly, don't always just go with the first thing you see. Look at an object you think like, oh, that's kind of weird or kind of interesting to look at. So you just find one, you click on it, and based on this, you're going to follow the required elements for the project. So I'm going to have you guys not only give me some background information on the artifact, but then I want you to analyze it. So I'll go back to that in a second. You will need to copy and paste the artifact images into a document. So if you don't know how to do that, really you just right click, copy, right, and you right click again in your document and you paste it. That's all you're doing. Okay, so you go, you find 4, and what you're going to be doing, other than the fact that you're going to be giving me the title of the artifact, the civilization it belonged to, where it was found, like this is all provided for you already on the website. These next few questions here, you might get information from the little paragraph that was next to the artifact, but you could also brainstorm and give me your own opinion. So who you think might have used it, where do you think it might have been used? So for example, was that item something meant for war? Would it have been decorative in a kitchen somewhere? Was it something you'd find maybe in a temple? What does it tell us about the tools of the time, the technology of the time, right? So if it's some type of sculpture, obviously they needed tools to carve into stone, right? And it might also give you that information in the little paragraph to the side on the museum's website. What does it tell us about the beliefs and values, right? Or the culture of the people who used it. So for instance, if it's a statue of a god, well, it tells us that, the god, let's say, of corn. Like, well, they're polytheistic, they believed in nature gods, right? That's telling us about their belief system, right? And that's what artifacts do. How do we know all this information about civilizations? We know because of the artifacts that we have found that they left behind. And then if you could compare it to something similar today, right? So if I find something that would have been used like in a religious ceremony, well, maybe I would be thinking of in the modern day, in Christianity, they have the blood of Christ, right? Which is represented like in a cup of wine, right? Or the breaking of bread, right? The Eucharist. So you can make comparisons like that and you'll create a sketch. So I break it down for you guys page by page, what each and every single page should look like. And even if you keep going, I provide you an example. Okay, so this would be one of the pages, right? So you'd write the title, civilization identified right next to it, so it's just an Olmec mask. And then I give a little basic identification elements, like it's basically a brief description of it. And then this whole paragraph here is taking those questions and answering it in paragraph form, which is what I want you to do. And that's it. So you do that for 4 artifacts, 1 Olmec, 1 Aztec, 1 Mayan, 1 Incan. And then I want you to try to sketch it, one of them, right? So it's a total of 5 pages that you'd be submitting to me, because I would want your sketch photographed and imported into the document on its own separate page. Why do I want you to sketch something? Sometimes we'll just look at an artifact, but when we really have to sit there and focus in and try to draw it, we find and pay more attention to certain details that we maybe would miss previously. If we were just looking at something, drawing forces you to focus on detail. So a sketch doesn't have to be a great work of art. Like I said, it shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes. But I just want you to kind of create something. It doesn't have to be a beautiful work of art. If you want to try to make it really fancy, you knock yourself out. But it's not required. It's more for get you guys to the process of looking at something and paying attention to specific detail. Okay, that's it. That's the project. Again, if you have questions, talk to me sooner rather than later. So this week we're talking about Mesoamerica. When we say Mesoamerica, we're talking about Middle America. Okay, so what's Middle America? It is Central America, right? And we will also be talking about South America. Okay, now this is just background. I restate a lot of this later, but why we're talking about Mesoamerica now is because after this week we're going to talk about the Age of Exploration and how people came about. They found the Americas, right? And they eventually these peoples were conquered by the Spanish. So it's setting us up for things we're going to talk about later. Now, the Olmecs, okay? I'm not requiring you to write down in your notes in that chart because there's a lot of unknowns with the civilization, okay? They are considered to be the mother civilization. Okay, what I mean by mother civilization, right, is that the things that they developed, right, so some of their beliefs, even farming techniques, we could say that it helped inspire future civilizations in the area, like the Mayans and Aztecs. So that's really why we look at these people. They're most known for these stone heads. I don't know if you guys may have ever watched Nick at Night or something, but there used to be this show, and Legends of the Hidden Temple, which is basically Olmec was the talking like guy in the show. That's a throwback to my childhood. So, Olmec civilization, we know that they were polytheistic, believe a lot in nature gods. So will the other civilizations of Mesoamerica. Now, other civilizations in Mesoamerica use techniques such as slash and burn farming. So basically, you cut down a bunch of trees, and then you clear the land, and whatever was burned. Basically, what it did was it helped to like bring nutrients back to the soil, and then later, they would go and they would farm again on that land. So big crops that they would do is things like maize, which is basically like kind of like corn. That was one of their most important crops, and actually cactus was really, really important too. It's just fun facts. Cactus can be used for a lot of things. They used to have a month-long celebration where they would drink and eat only cactus. So you could cook cactus, you could make like a cactus soup, cactus wine. They actually had a way of actually making like a resin out of it so that it was sticky, and they could use it to like, for instance, like making a roof, and putting together like shingles on the top of a roof or something. So that's, what slash and burn farming would look like. A lot of these people also believed in sacrifice. So whether it's killing of animals or killing of people, slaves, captured enemies, they did believe in both human and animal sacrifice as a way to please the gods, to provide rain, because they were predominantly agricultural based civilizations. Okay, that's what we use the term bloodletting. It's like letting the blood of sacrifice victims. They also came up with this game called Pawcatuck. It's an interesting little game. You can actually like look it up on YouTube. It's kind of like a combination of soccer and basketball. There we go, I had a picture of it. So basically what they do is they kind of like hit this rubber ball back and forth, but they don't use their feet, they use like their hips and their bodies. And then they try to go and basically they run up like these side walls, and they like try and bounce the ball, like hit it with their hip and get it through like this stone hoop. This repeats a little bit. Their leaders are often seen both as not just their government leaders, but also spiritual leaders, right? So their leader having a connection with God, which we've talked about with other civilizations earlier this year. If you look at their temples, their step temples, very similar to the ziggurats that you would find in Mesopotamia. So it's kind of fascinating, the fact that these people had step temples, and the people of Mesopotamia had step temples, but civilizations nowhere near each other as far as when they existed and never had contact with one another. Only answer for that, ancient aliens. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously. But no, I'm just kidding. So what would they use? This is just fun facts. What they would use to kill people, or let blood out, let blood spill. So they use basic blades, but even like they would find just anything that was sharp, basically. So they had access to like shark's teeth or like stingray, like they have these really sharp spines, and they use like these different objects to like cut people open and make the gods happy. Jade, by the way, that was actually what was used in my my project example. Jade is like a green stone. It's really pretty. But you could kind of sharpen it, and you can make it into a blade if you wanted to. Like that one down there is jade. Right, part of the sacrifice, there's actually a movie. It's called Apocalypto. It's not my recommendation. I'm just saying it exists. But in the movie, it's also rated R. So just putting that out there. But in the movie, they actually show like part of this human sacrifice. So basically at the top of one of those temples, right? You'd have like the king or the priest residing over there. And what he would do is he would, while you're still breathing, they hold you down, they cut out your heart, rip your heart out, and then like they toss you down the stairs. And then they probably pour the blood from your heart over something, and your body would just go rolling down the steps. So the Olmecs was the first people we talked about. Now the Mayans and the Aztecs also existed in the area of Mexico. So what we call this area, if you never knew, it has a formal name called the Yucatan Peninsula. So a lot of similar things we found the Olmecs, like that's what the Mayans and Aztecs kind of did too. If we look at their religious beliefs and their agricultural things that they practiced, they also had terrace farming. Parts of the area is kind of mountainous sometimes, so you'd cut these steps into the mountainsides. And I've talked about this earlier in the year. I've shown you pictures from Asia where they create this terrace farming, so they could farm in places where the land is not flat. They also practice the slash and burn method that the Olmecs did as well. Okay. Other things that you would find, again, like foods that you would find not just in Central America, but North America too, right, in the Americas, right? So squash and pumpkins, tomatoes, right, if you ever had Mexican food, right, a lot of things based on beans and chili peppers. Right, so Aztecs were probably a little further north there. Their capital city, Tenochtitlan, is actually the capital of Mexico today, Mexico City. It's basically where it was. It was a hub of a place. Okay, there was a lot of people that lived there. Interesting enough that there was a lot of water that kind of surrounded the city. So what they had to do, and this is where the Aztecs kind of differ a bit in their farming methods, they create these things called chinampas, which are these artificial islands, basically like floating gardens. So they had a method that they could basically like grow plants out of the water. They create like these little garden beds, and they basically get on like their little canoes or boats, and they go around farming like these little garden islands. So that's basically what they looked like. So kind of cool. And they're trying to bring it back today. They're still trying to use that practice today and keep it alive in the city. Now the Aztec people, they had made alliances with some, but they definitely had their enemies. Not all groups were created equal. So even like when the Europeans show up, what the Europeans did was, because the Aztecs had made so many enemies, that the Europeans made friends with Aztec enemies, then basically made alliances with them so they could basically take over the Aztec Empire, the Europeans. So kind of smart, I guess, on their part. Now, if we're talking about society, basic structure that you would see in most, right? So your king or emperor, right, being at the top of that social pyramid, followed by your nobility, your commoners, right? Most people always being commoners or captured enemies or slaves. Most people who own land are always usually your nobility, but commoners, even in the Aztec Empire, did own land too. I'm just flying through these because, I mean, they're kind of self-explanatory. Aztec people also played that game, that Poktok game. It's also a lot by Olmec traditions. They did do the human sacrifice thing, right? So just, again, a lot of similarities between all the Mesoamerican civilizations. And then lastly, we get down to the Incan Empire. So Inca Empire was different. Okay, you can see some differences because if you look at their location, right there on the western coast of South America, so if you ever heard places like Machu Picchu, which I'll show you pictures of in a moment, but we're talking about like modern day, like Peru and Chile, right? That's where like that is. So basically along the coast where the Andes Mountains are. So they had a very large empire. They're the largest empire, I would argue, in Mesoamerica by land size. Okay, because they were also located on the Andes Mountains, they did do the practice of terrace farming, right? So in order to sustain their 11.5 million population. Now, what's also interesting is because their empire is so long, well, what do you do with a big empire? Well, like what the Romans did, or like what the Han Dynasty also had established in China way back, is they built this network of roads, right? So they can communicate across their empire. They too also had a messenger system, right? A relay system like how Persia did, right? So you have one person, they, let's say, travel 100 miles, just making a number up, and then they get to like a checkpoint, and then they give that message to somebody else, right? Kind of almost like the game of telephone, right? If you ever played that when you're a kid, where you tell a story to a friend and then they keep relaying it. It's basically that idea, right? The courier services, that's what I'm talking about, the messenger services. What's also unique about the Incan Empire is their mita, or this is the way in which they provided labor, right? So again, this is more like an economic thing. Basically, each and every person was required to, at times, be a part of this mita labor service. So at some point, let's say even if you were like an artisan or you did some other job, at some point, everyone was required to work for the state in one of these categories, right? So where you need like a lot of manpower, right? So things basically that allow for the movement of people and goods and having access to food, right? Things that are necessities. They did have a writing system. Okay, the other civilizations did, the Incas did not. What they did was they used these quipus, which are kind of cool. I know they look like big necklaces or like belts or something, but basically they recorded information on these little knotted cords. So they make these little knots, and it was really more used for mathematical purposes. So collecting taxes, right? How much tax to collect, how much was collected from a certain place. Like it was really used more like a abacus in a way, you know, for counting. If we're looking at gender roles, okay, men and women basically exist in their own separate spheres, okay, but they are both seen as equally valuable to the economy of their civilizations, and they have their own kind of autonomy or independence, their own freedom. It doesn't mean there was total gender equality, but it's not to say one group was put down much more than the other. This is just repetitive, so that's why I kind of just flying through, and that's it. Okay, the last one you guys don't have to worry about. Actually, I should just delete it. So that's it for the week. Questions? Ask me sooner rather than later. Be well. Keep it classy. Martin's out.